You were not abused. No shouting. No hitting. No obvious trauma that people point to and say, that's why. And yet, something still went wrong. You grew up feeling oddly empty. Not broken. Not dramatic. Just quietly disconnected. You learned early how to stay out of the way. How to not ask for too much. How to not need too much. No one told you to stop feeling. So you stopped on your own. This is emotional neglect. And it's one of the most misunderstood childhood experiences there is. Because emotional neglect is not about what happened to you. It's about what didn't. No one noticed when you were overwhelmed. No one mirrored your emotions back to you. No one helped you make sense of what you were feeling. You were fed. You were clothed. You were educated. But emotionally, you were left alone. And the dangerous part is this. Children don't interpret neglect as my parents failed. They interpret it as something is wrong with me. So you adapted. You learned to self-soothe before you learned to self-express. You learned independence before you learned safety. You learned silence before you learned trust. From the outside, you looked like a good child. Well-behaved. Low maintenance. Mature for your age. Adults praised you for it. What they didn't see was the cost. Because when a child's emotions are consistently ignored, the brain doesn't rebel. It recalibrates. The nervous system learns that emotions are useless signals. There is no response. No relief. No repair. So the brain turns the volume down. This is not weakness. It's efficiency. A child who feels deeply in an emotionally empty environment suffers more. A child who numbs survives better. Over time, that numbness becomes a personality. You grow into an adult who struggles to identify feelings. Not because you don't have them, but because you were never taught the language. You say I'm fine and mean it. You say I don't know when asked what you feel. You feel uncomfortable when people ask emotional questions. Not because you're cold. But because emotional closeness feels unfamiliar. This is why emotional neglect often hides behind competence. You might be successful. Reliable. High-functioning. You show up. You perform. You get things done. But inside, there's a persistent sense of distance. From others. From yourself. Happiness feels muted. Sadness feels vague. Joy feels temporary and unreal. And because there was no clear trauma, you doubt yourself. You think, nothing bad happened to me. Others had it worse. I shouldn't feel this way. So you minimize your own experience. This is one of the most damaging effects of emotional neglect. It teaches you to invalidate your inner world. You become someone who needs proof to justify pain. Someone who believes suffering must be dramatic to be real. But psychology shows something uncomfortable. The absence of emotional attunement during childhood affects the same systems as overt trauma. The brain areas responsible for emotional regulation, self-worth, and connection still develop differently. Not because of harm, but because of emptiness. A child needs emotional feedback the way a body needs gravity. Without it, everything feels ungrounded. This is why many emotionally neglected adults feel a constant low-grade anxiety. Or a sense of floating. Or a quiet loneliness even in relationships. You may crave connection, but feel uneasy when it arrives. You may want intimacy, but pull away when it becomes real. Because closeness requires emotional presence. And emotional presence was never modeled as safe. So you learn to stay self-contained. You don't ask for help easily. You feel guilty when you need reassurance. You feel exposed when you express vulnerability. Not because you're broken, but because no one taught you that your emotions mattered. Here's the most important part. Emotional neglect doesn't mean your parents didn't love you. It means they didn't know how to emotionally engage. Many emotionally neglected children were raised by emotionally neglected adults. No villain. No intent. Just a gap passed down quietly. And because there's no obvious injury, emotional neglect often goes untreated. Unrecognized. Unspoken. People seek help for anxiety, for depression, for burnout. But the root remains invisible. Until someone finally asks the right question. What did you need that you didn't receive? This question can feel destabilizing at first. Because it points inward. To a space you were trained to ignore. But noticing is not blaming. And awareness is not accusation. Understanding emotional neglect is not about rewriting the past. It's about reclaiming the present. Because once you see the pattern, something shifts. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What happened to me emotionally?" You begin to understand why self-compassion feels unnatural. Why rest feels undeserved. Why emotional needs feel like burdens. And slowly, you can learn what was never taught. How to name feelings without judging them. How to sit with discomfort instead of suppressing it. How to recognize your own emotional signals as valid. This is not about becoming emotional overnight. It's about becoming emotionally present, little by little. Because the goal was never to stay numb forever. Numbness was a strategy, not an identity. And the fact that you're questioning it now means something important. It means your nervous system is no longer in survival mode. It means your mind is ready for a different way of living. You were not abused. But you were unseen. And being unseen shapes a person. The good news is this. What was missing can be learned. What was silent can be heard. What was ignored can be acknowledged. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But gently. Intentionally. And that is where healing actually begins.